But let's go now to London. The other big story is, of course, how Nigel Farage and his reform movement, I touched on it last week, is surging in the opinion polls. The election is this coming Thursday. You can watch it here on Sky on Friday morning, of course, Australian time. But Farage, who's sat in the studio with us, he's a great bloke and a very talented politician. Some of the polls say Farage could win up to 18 seats. Who knows? Well, I tell you who does know, or certainly who knows more than most of us, is Brendan O'Neill. Brendan, great to see you, as always. You're there in London. What an exciting time. The debate's not. But tell us, Brendan, thank you so much for staying up late and coming on Outsiders. We love having you here. What is happening? What's the latest in Britain with Nigel Farage and the election?
Well, Farage has certainly stirred the election up, and someone needed to. It was the most boring election in British history. You know, Rishi Sunak versus Keir Starmer. It was like choosing between two bank managers, you know, two cheeks of the same butthole, both boring, both grey, both technocratic. There was really no choice at all. And then Nigel Farage, who initially said he was going to go off to America and work with Donald Trump, he then decided to throw himself into the election, and he has really stirred it up. He has brought to the surface all the issues that people want to talk about, from mass immigration to freedom of speech to the crazy cult of net zero, all of these things that he's promising to get a handle on. And he's injected some momentum, and people are pleased that the uniparty, because the Tories and the Labour are pretty much indistinguishable these days. People are pleased that someone is challenging the uni-party and bringing in a different voice to politics.
Rita.
Now, Brendan, the polls show a Labour landslide is pretty much assured. Is Farage's entire strategy a two-election strategy, just to position reform, to bring in the Tories, the disaffected Tories, into his camp and then really have a red-hot go next time?
It could be. I think that's probably what he's thinking. You know, a lot of Tories are saying if you vote for Nigel Farage, if you vote for reform, you're basically helping Labour get into power. You're ensuring that Labour has a massive majority. I don't think that argument lands anymore. People are sick and tired of the Tory party and the Labour Party. Lots of people are anyway. And they do want something different. They do want an alternative. And I think people are perfectly within their rights to vote for reform, even if at this election it won't make a massive difference. I think it could build up to something bigger at future elections. But, you know, people underestimate how disastrous a Labour government is going to be. You know, Keir Starmer and his team, they present themselves as the adults in the room, middle of the road, very centrist, very sensible, but they are psychopaths. They are political lunatics. And the policies they are pursuing in terms of the billions of pounds they will spend on net zero, which will basically further deindustrialize Britain, it will be like industrial suicide. They're against freedom of speech, and the way in which they define Islamophobia basically means we might soon have a blasphemy law where you can't criticize Islam without having the police feel your collar. And also, they don't even know what a woman is. You know, this is a party run by a man who says that 99.9% of women don't have a penis, which means he thinks that 1 in 1,000 women do have a penis. So these are people who don't understand truth, biology, freedom, industry, growth, or any of the other important things of politics. And it will be disastrous when they get into power.
James.
Brendan, just back on Nigel Farage. I mean, he entered the election just a few weeks ago, and the momentum he's generated has been quite amazing in a very short space of time. No matter how many seats he wins, do you think he'll regret not having thrown his hat in the ring earlier? Because if he'd had more time, surely the result could be incredible as compared to what it may well be, perhaps 18 seats.
I think you're right. I think he probably does regret not going for it sooner. And he got a lot of flack when he said, look, good luck, Britain, but I'm leaving and I'm going off to America. He got so much flack about that, including from me, because I wanted him to get involved in the British election. Now he is involved. He's making waves, but he could have made bigger waves. There's no question about that if he had done it earlier and in a bit more of an organized way. But the thing that's happening now, the striking thing now, is that he's getting a lot of momentum, but he's also being attacked relentlessly by the mainstream media and the political class. The knives are out because these people loathe populism. They loathe the gammon, which is how they refer to working class voters. They are still scared of the Brexit spirit that was unleashed in the referendum vote 8 years ago. They hate all these political waves that are coming from ordinary people who are sick of the mainstream political class. And so they are trying to kill off Farage's movement before it really gathers a lot of steam. So he's got a lot on his plate. He entered the race a little bit too late, and now the establishment is out to get him. So it's an uphill struggle for Farage, but so far he's doing pretty well.
So, Brendan, I want to ask you just quickly two things. One is, how many Conservatives do you think voters are swapping over to Reform? But also I wanted to get your thoughts on Glastonbury, the pop festival, where you've got the likes of Damon Albarn from Blur basically touting the Palestinian cause at a pop festival. The Nova Pop Festival in October 7th was where Hamas massacred and butchered people, and yet these clowns at Glastonbury Pop Festival are waving Palestinian, pro-Palestinian flags. What sort of sickness has taken hold of Britain, Brendan?
You know, when I look at the Glastonbury Festival, I do actually feel a little bit ill. As you say, the Nova Music Festival was just 8 months ago. 364 people were murdered there. Some of the women there were raped as well by a bunch of racists, by an anti-Semitic army. And now 8 months later, we have another music festival in Glastonbury, one of the best known in the world. And instead of offering solidarity to their fellow festival goers who were murdered just 8 months ago, they're waving the flag of the anti-Semitic army that carried out that mass slaughter. I mean, it's such a grotesque spectacle, and it really demonstrates how thin and shallow and bigoted and racist so-called progressive politics has become, where they are waving the flag of the people who carried out that killing rather than offering support to the people who were killed. I think it's really horrible.
It's disgusting. And Brendan, Conservatives swapping to Reform, is that happening? There's been a couple of high-profile ones, but broadly speaking?
I think a lot of Conservative voters will switch to Reform this time, and they'll take a punt on Reform and see how they do. But, you know, remember that a lot of Labour voters switched to the Conservatives in 2019. Yeah. Huge numbers of Labour voters gave Boris Johnson a chance, but then we got COVID and we got everything else, and that was all a bit of a mess. So the lesson of British politics right now is that people don't have a political home. They're looking for a party that they think gives voice to their concerns, and they're playing around with their votes, and they're trying out different people. This time, a lot of them will try out Nigel Farage's Reform, and I think it could have a transformative impact on British politics in the long run.
Rita.
Well, you mentioned the Boris Johnson's success in getting Labor voters. I mean, he won in a landslide, but then they governed like Labor, and the energy policies, the environmental policies were a big part of that. And you've got so many Britons who've been plunged into energy poverty now. What are Labor going to do in that area? Because we know their green dreams are even wackier than what Boris Johnson was dreaming up.
Labour are going to be even worse than the Tories. And the Tories have been bad. You know, all the nonsense in Britain that I like to talk about, we have to bear in mind it all happened under 14 years of Tory rule. All the wokeness, all the environmentalism, all the trans mania, all the rubbish that kids are being taught in schools, it all happened under a Tory administrations, and we shouldn't forget that. But the environmental issue is so important in Europe right now. You know, we've got farmers rising up against these crazy climate change policies, against net zero, because it's even making it difficult for farmers to make food. This is how crazy the elites in Europe have become. They want to stop people from being able to make food. In Ireland, there is a discussion about killing 200,000 cows because they're producing too much methane. And this is basically animal sacrifice, sacrificing animals to appease the gods of weather. This is the situation we've arrived at. So net zero is a religious cult. It's an incredibly destructive cult that will deindustrialize formerly industrial nations. And Labour is at the forefront of pushing this ideology. So when they get into power, all that green stuff is going to get worse and worse. And I think people will rue the day that they put that party into Downing Street.